Welcome to Age of the Obsolete, the weekly podcast that examines the intersection of technology, democracy, and the future of work. Back in 2011, when my son told me that he was going down to Zuccotti Park to join the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators, I was enthused. I thought that it would be a great civics lesson for him. By participating in the march, he would discover not only the importance of our First Amendment rights, but how the process of peaceful protest is a fundamental tool in effecting political change. Afterwards, I decided I was wrong. If you want to argue that Occupy Wall Street placed a spotlight on the income inequalities that pervade this nation, I'll concede the point. And if you tell me that the protesters' ability to march and be heard underscored the power of the First Amendment, I'll also agree. But did anything change? Not from where I'm sitting. Today the income gap has only widened. The banks and other large financial institutions still hold, and our representatives in Congress are still beholden to the lobbyists and corporate powers whose monies fund their campaigns and reelections. If you want to tell me that without Occupy Wall Street, there would never have been a Bernie Sanders or the populist movement he engendered, you're probably right. But let's not forget that the same issues that created Bernie Sanders also gave rise to Donald Trump, as well as the nationalist movement that he was able to disguise as populism. So I'll say it again. For all its Sturm and Drang, Occupy Wall Street was a failure. If anything changed, despite the heartfelt convictions of the march's organizers. So is that it? Are we ultimately impotent when confronted by corruption and indifference? Or do citizens still have the power to effect positive change? Occupy Wall Street was born from the havoc caused by the financial meltdown of 2008, when the banks promoted worthless derivatives as a viable investment, and the country fell into a punishing recession. Then, rather than being prosecuted, the very same banks that created the recession received a government bailout. Given the duplicity of the situation, it was only natural for people to rise up in anger. But as most of us have learned from our personal lives, anger, no matter how justified, rarely has a positive outcome. Just as physical anger raises our anxiety and jeopardizes our health, political anger clouds our judgment, making us focus on causes rather than solutions, rhetoric more than practice. If we want to effect lasting change in both the political and economic structures of this country, we need to put aside our anger and replace it with a thoughtful assessment of both the issues and actors at hand. Instead of rhetoric, what we need is a plan, one with a clearly defined timeline and tangible objectives. Every plan starts with the individual, but ultimately spreads to the greater community, or in political terms, to the grassroots. What is the grassroots? A movement in which dissatisfaction with the status quo morphs into an idea for change. Grassroots movements start small and at the local level, independent of the existing power structure. Fundamental to every grassroots movement is a belief in bottom-up decision-making engendered by mass participation in the political process. Sometimes the easy part of grassroots advocacy is finding people who are passionate about your cause. Where many grassroots campaigns stumble is when you start to translate passion into action and then action into a political movement. Talk is easy. Sustainable action requires planning, dedication, and discipline. Another weakness of grassroots movements, at least from my perspective, is the attempt to either change or influence the beliefs or actions of those in power. If history has taught us anything, it's that the few have never willingly transferred power to the many. For them, shared power is power diluted and ultimately worthless, which means that the only way to achieve change is to remove those who currently oppose it, replacing them with political representatives born of the grassroots movement, men and women whose allegiance is to democracy rather than the vested interests. And yes, I know, statements such as this can sound not only naive, but out of touch with both human nature and political reality. But is that a reason not to try? Occupy Wall Street may have failed, but it was a noble effort that led to a growing populism. It is to refine that populism, to remove from it all vestiges of racism, prejudice, and nationalistic fervor, to replace hatred for the other with hatred for injustice in all its manifestations, to create a common goal that unites rather than divides us, to not only demand change, but work towards it across the entire political spectrum. It won't be easy. Change never is. But putting aside our varying backgrounds and circumstances, the one thing common to the majority of Americans is our belief in progress and a better future for us all.
Look for people in your neighborhood or in your school who are doing something about the injustices of the world, who are involved in some movement to save the environment or to stop war or to help people who are in need. Look for people like that and consider that when you get out of your own shell, if you leave your living room and television set and go and join other people who are doing something to make life better, life becomes more interesting to you and more fulfilling. Tell them about the people who were in the South during the Civil Rights Movement who were working to end racial segregation and who went through all sorts of hell, and many of them were beaten and put in jail and so on. But when they got together years later, they would look back on those years and they would say, those are terrible times we went through. And those were the best years of my life.
This is John Rivito saying, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or need additional information on any of these podcasts, please go to our website at ageoftheobsolete.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.